With us now, Georgetown University professor Michael Eric Dyson. He's also author of Can You Hear Me Now? The Inspiration, Wisdom, and Insight of Michael Eric Dyson. Thanks very much for being with us. And join the conversation. What do you make of the former president's comments pertaining to race?
Well, you know I love you and Joe, but I'm going to have to respectfully disagree here. And my good friend, Mr. Todd, I think that obviously, absolutely, there is some legitimate critique and opposition to Mr. Obama based on ideology and politics. Nobody would deny that. But it doesn't mean, therefore, that some of the opposition is not driven by race. I mean, what is being a monkey, a Nazi? What is teabaggers? What does Mr. Obama is not really an American? When you begin to put all this stuff together, of course, it's volatile, the racial atmosphere out there, the racial undercurrents that really reinforce prevailing stereotypes about Mr. Obama. Now, it would be political suicide for the Obama camp to acknowledge all of this stuff. So why put the burden back on him? It's like asking an abused woman, are you doing any better yet, versus asking the abuser. It's also like terror. Racism is like terrorism. So we haven't had but one attack here, that is the most recent 9/11, and yet we continue to celebrate the anniversaries of it. We mark them solemnly. We talk about raising our defense against it preemptively and proactively, and I think we got to do the same thing with race and racism. It doesn't mean that but we ask Americans, hey, if a bag is out there and it looks weird, if a person is out there and they look weird, report them, talk about it. But with race, we do want to put our heads in the sand. We want to pretend that it's all over, and I think that the obvious opposition to Mr. Obama, nobody can even acknowledge that, yeah, some of that stuff is pretty ridiculous. Mr. Carter, as a Southern man, understands the deeply entrenched beliefs and racist attitudes that continue to persist in certain segments of our nation. Doesn't mean that most Americans are that, but it means there's enough of it for us to be concerned, and I think we have to acknowledge that it's a reality.
Well, Professor, as a Southern man, I can tell you that I acknowledge racism as a reality, not only in the South, but all across the country. At the same time, though, if President Obama, if the opposition he was receiving as President of the United States was unprecedented, right, that would be one thing. But as I've said before, Bill Clinton faced much more animosity and hatred, and I heard much more vile things said about Bill and Hillary Clinton behind closed doors from 1992 to 2000 than I've heard about President Obama and George W. Bush. My God, the things that were said about George W. Bush over the past 8 years, equally vile on the far left.
I don't deny that. I'm not talking about the ideology of the politics. That stuff is par for the course. But what does being a monkey have to do with that? Tell me what ideology that fits in, left or right. Tell me what ideology a blank screen that's black with two eyes. Tell me what ideology it fits into when you have a watermelon patch sent out by a staffer of a particular government official. So, Joe, all I'm asking you to consider here is that you're absolutely right in terms of the venom, but I didn't hear anybody call George Bush in public an arrogant white boy. I didn't hear anybody talk about Bill Clinton in such racialized terms that we were incapable of having bitterly opposed ideological and political viewpoints.
George Bush, when he was a sitting president, a monkey? On this program.
Well, people say things. People have said some unbelievably vicious things. Bill Clinton was accused of being a murderer. And again, Eric, let's not overlook the fact, and we all agree here, racism is still alive and well in America today. I think we've made great strides over the past 40 years. But at the same time, again, remember, Bill Clinton was accused of being a murderer throughout his presidency, and a rapist throughout his presidency.
Listen, and that was
Eric,
that
my
was
point
awful.
is this again: the viciousness that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton faced, much more extreme than Barack Obama. So I'm just suggesting, if you see hateful signs out there, and yes, there will be some racist signs out there because there's still idiots who are racist, but let's not just take all of that animosity. You brought up Tea Party people. That has nothing to do with race. That has to do with
let me tell you this. The reality is you're making a legitimate point, but you're failing to see the logical fallacy here. Just because there was bitter opposition to Mr. Clinton, just because there was bitter opposition to George Bush, doesn't mean that the bitter opposition to Mr. Obama is not partly driven by racial considerations. The two are not mutually exclusive. I agree with everything you've said. I was a supporter of Bill Clinton and a critic, and I understood what happened there. I support Barack Obama. I was one of of the first people to endorse him within my own community. I've been critical of him on some things as well, but my criticism is not driven by a racial animus or resistance to him. And all I'm suggesting to you is that when you have Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck leading the parade with vicious and racial implications and inferences, there's no question that some of the opposition that has been ginned up against Mr. Obama is racially rooted, along with the natural bitter ideological and political opposition. And the two have merged here.
Let me stop you there. My criticism of Glenn Beck has been that he's actually accused the president of being a racist. I don't know that I've heard Glenn say anything that was in itself racist, although I'm very disturbed by a lot of things he says. And Rush Limbaugh, what has Rush Limbaugh said that you would consider racist? Because I haven't heard that.
About the president.
About the president. What's he said that's
about
racist?
The president, I mean, you know, Barack the Magic Negro that was played constantly on the show. Did we play...
Wait, hold on, stop a second. Yeah, that's intellectually dishonest. You know that it was an African-American LA Times columnist that said that.
No. I'm saying that Barack
Limbaugh was quoting
Mr. But you know, on Mr. Limbaugh's show, that was a constant theme, that was a constant attack. That Mr. Limbaugh, along with saying that slavery was not a bad thing, along with saying that the opposition to African American people had to be driven, along with saying that Mr. Obama
Rush
is
Limbaugh
seeking.
Said slavery wasn't a bad thing.
Of course, go back and read it. I mean, you got to read what he said. And then he also talked about the opposition to Obama and leading the opposition. So, but look, Joe, let's be real here. There's not only explicit and above board and empirically verifiable racism, there are attitudes, dispositions, there are behaviors. Now, we know that stuff is much more difficult to prove, and I think what Mr. Carter has done here is told the truth and tried to open up to his fellow Southerners, his fellow Americans, to say, look, let's be honest here. We know that there are some oppositions, then some political and ideological differences that cannot be explained by race, and there's some of the stuff that is. Why is it that we find it so difficult to admit that there is the possibility that some of the opposition driven against Mr. Obama is racially rooted and deeply entrenched in bias?
There's the question right there.
Right. And again, we have suggested that we understand racism exists, and I'm sure some of the opposition, that some of the opposition is based on race. I believe a very small portion based upon all of the conversations of all of the Republicans and all the conservative movement people. I just don't hear race. And most of the people that I talk to, again, the people
we track, Professor, the polls, and we have watched him come in, highest approval ratings.
But that's
like
what I was going to say.
Here's the bottom line. We've had bailouts. We've had stimulus plans. We've had all sorts of things that cause people to maybe question
unemployment
what's going on with the government.
to 10%.
Unemployment at almost 10%.
I have no problem with any of that.
And perhaps some of the opposition might be that people are concerned about what the president is doing.
But how does the concern get expressed? That's all I'm saying. I'm not denying everything you're saying is right, but it still doesn't address the issues. You can say all of what you just said, absolutely right. I agree with that. But there's also a significant, I'm not saying it's the dominant, but a significant undercurrent in this that fuses with the kind of opposition to Obama that's about the suspicion of the birthers. Wait a minute, the birthers questioning if Mr. Obama is even an American, whether he's a legitimate American citizen. What Mr. Carter said is that there is a great amount of white Americans who may be suspicious of and skeptical about Mr. Obama vis-a-vis his ability or the ability of African American people to lead the nation. Why can't we acknowledge that and say, it's both and not either or?
I might buy into that. Except that the numbers don't support it, because he had a 70% approval rating.
Okay.
And now it's 50%. Those people didn't just turn into racists.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've got to go. We're up against a hard break.
To have him back.
I just don't believe, Eric, that there's a quote great percentage of Americans who oppose him. But let's continue this conversation. Hopefully, maybe we can get you on set in New York next week when we get back and don't have to do these godforsaken hours. But it's good having you on. This is a great conversation. We need to continue because, Eric, I will say, I'm very concerned about extremists out there, and it's been on both sides, but in this case especially, fanning the flames of hatred, whether it's racial or ideological.
Class warfare.
We need to continue this conversation.
All right.
No doubt about
Professor Dyson, thank you so much. And Chuck, thank you as well.